The lawyer's office smelled like old books and expensive furniture polish. Daniel sat in the corner of the crowded room, his daughter Lily pressed against his side. She was only 7 years old, and her small hand gripped his tightly as she looked around at all the unfamiliar faces. They didn't belong here. Daniel knew that. His work boots were still dusty from his construction job, and his jacket had a small tear near the shoulder that he kept meaning to fix. Everyone else in the room wore suits and dresses that probably cost more than his monthly rent. But they'd received the invitation just like everyone else. Mrs. Whitmore had passed away 3 weeks ago, and apparently she'd wanted them at the reading of her will. Daniel had known Mrs. Whitmore years ago. She'd been his piano teacher back when he was 17, full of dreams about playing concert halls and recording albums. She'd believed in him, really believed in him. She used to tell him that his playing had soul, that he didn't just hit the notes but made them mean something. That felt like a lifetime ago now. The lawyer, a thin man with glasses that kept sliding down his nose, cleared his throat. The room fell silent. Daniel felt Lily shift nervously beside him, and he gave her hand a gentle squeeze. They'd be out of here soon enough, back to their small apartment where things made sense. "Thank you all for coming," the lawyer began, shuffling through a stack of papers. Mrs. Helena Whitmore left very specific instructions for the distribution of her estate. Daniel half listened as the lawyer read through various bequests: money to charities, jewelry to family members, her house to a distant cousin. None of it had anything to do with him. He was about to quietly slip out when the lawyer's next words made him freeze. And now, regarding Mrs. Whitmore's most prized possession, her 1920s Steinway grand piano. Daniel's breath caught. He remembered that piano. It was the most beautiful instrument he'd ever played, with keys that responded to the slightest touch and a sound that could fill an entire concert hall. "Mrs. Whitmore has created a challenge," the lawyer continued. "The piano will be awarded to anyone present in this room who can play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 to the satisfaction of 3 professional judges. The performance must take place within the next 30 days. The room erupted in excited whispers. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Chopin's Ballade No. 1. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the classical repertoire, over 9 minutes of complex fingerwork and emotional depth. He'd learned it once, years ago, when Mrs. Whitmore had pushed him to master it. A woman's laugh cut through the chatter. Daniel looked up to see someone standing near the front of the room. She was probably in her mid-30s, dressed in an elegant black dress, her dark hair pulled back in a perfect bun. "This is almost insulting," the woman said, her voice dripping with amusement. She turned to address the room, and Daniel could see the family resemblance immediately. This must be Mrs. Whitmore's niece. "My aunt had quite the sense of humor, I suppose. That piece requires years of dedicated practice and professional training." She gestured around the room with a dismissive wave. "Please, by all means, feel free to embarrass yourselves. I'm sure it will be entertaining, though I can't imagine any of you coming close to playing it properly." Her eyes swept across the room and landed on Daniel. Her lip curled slightly as she took in his worn clothes and work boots. "Especially not you," she said, though she didn't address him directly. Just looked at him like he was something tracked in on someone's shoe. "The woman's name was Victoria," the lawyer explained. "She was a professional concert pianist herself, had studied at the best schools, performed in prestigious venues around the world. She'd been close to her aunt and had expected to inherit the piano directly. Of course, I'll be participating in this challenge as well," Victoria announced as if there was any doubt. "Someone needs to ensure my aunt's legacy is properly honored. That piano deserves to be in the hands of a true musician, not someone who'll sell it at the first opportunity." Daniel felt his face flush. He wanted to stand up, to defend himself and everyone else in the room. But what would he say? That he used to be good? That he'd had potential once? That life had gotten in the way of his dreams? Lily tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered so quietly only he could hear, "you can play piano." He looked down at his daughter's wide, trusting eyes. "That was a long time ago, sweetheart," he whispered back. "But you played for Mommy, I remember. Daniel's throat tightened. Yes, he'd played for his wife before she got sick. Before the medical bills piled up and he'd had to sell their small upright piano. Before she died and left him to raise Lily alone, working whatever jobs he could find to keep a roof over their heads. The lawyer was explaining the logistics now. Anyone interested in attempting the challenge needed to register. There would be 3 professional judges brought in to evaluate each performance. The decision would be final. Victoria had already moved on to discussing her plans for the piano with some of the other relatives. Of course, I'll be donating it to the Prestige Academy of Music after I win, she was saying, loud enough for everyone to hear. It will be displayed in their main hall, where future generations of serious musicians can appreciate it. The way she said serious musicians felt like another jab at everyone else in the room. Daniel stood up carefully, trying not to draw attention. He just wanted to leave, to get Lily out of this uncomfortable situation and back to their normal life. But as they made their way toward the door, the lawyer called out, "Mr. Carter, one moment, please." Daniel turned back confused. The lawyer approached with an envelope. "Mrs. Whitmore left this for you specifically. She asked that I give it to you after explaining the challenge." With shaky hands, Daniel opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter on Mrs. Whitmore's distinctive cream-colored stationery. Her elegant script filled the page. "My dear Daniel," it began. "If you're reading this, then I've passed on and you've heard about my little challenge. I know life took you away from music. I know you've faced hardships that would break most people. But I also know that the gift you have doesn't disappear just because you stop using it. It waits. I've always believed you were meant for something special. This is my final lesson. For you. Not about music, but about believing in yourself again. Whether you accept this challenge or not, know that you were one of my greatest students and I was honored to teach you. With love and faith, Helena." Daniel's eyes stung as he finished reading. Lily pressed closer to him, trying to see the letter. "What does it say, Daddy?" He folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. "It says Mrs. Whitmore remembered me." As they walked out of the lawyer's office into the bright afternoon sun, Daniel could hear Victoria's voice still echoing in his mind, dismissive and certain. He thought about the piano, sitting in Mrs. Whitmore's estate waiting. He thought about the music he used to make, the dreams he used to have. Lily slipped her small hand back into his. "You could do it," she said simply, with the absolute confidence only a 7-year-old child can have in her father. Daniel didn't answer. He just held his daughter's hand and walked toward the bus stop, the letter feeling heavy in his pocket, carrying weight that had nothing to do with the paper it was written on. The next week felt surreal. Daniel tried to forget about the whole thing, but it was impossible. Victoria had turned the piano challenge into a media spectacle. She'd invited local news stations to cover the attempts. Every evening, Daniel would come home from work, exhausted and dusty, to find Lily glued to the television. There she was, again Victoria in another elegant outfit standing beside Mrs. Whitmore's beautiful Steinway piano. "Today we witnessed another attempt," Victoria told the reporter, her smile perfectly practiced. "Unfortunately, as expected, the performance fell far short of what this magnificent piece requires. However, in the spirit of my dear aunt's charitable nature, I'll be donating $500 to the Youth Arts Foundation for each failed attempt." Daniel watched as a middle-aged man walked away from the piano, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The 3 judges sat stone-faced at their table, having stopped the performance barely 2 minutes in. "She's mean," Lily said quietly, still staring at the screen. "She's just confident, honey. She's a professional pianist." "No, Daddy, she's mean. Look at how she smiled when that man messed up." Daniel looked closer. His daughter was right. There was something cold in Victoria's expression, something that enjoyed other people's failures. Over the next few days it got worse. Victoria had turned the whole thing into her personal show. She gave interviews about protecting her aunt's legacy, about the importance of preserving classical music standards. She posted videos on social media, analyzing each failed attempt with technical precision that felt more like mockery than education. The 4th movement requires a delicate balance between power and restraint. she explained in one video that had thousands of views. These amateurs simply don't understand the emotional complexity Chopin was trying to convey. Daniel's coworker showed him the video during lunch break. Man, this lady is something else. Acts like she's doing everyone a favor by being so harsh. She's a talented pianist, Daniel said, defending her without knowing why. Talented at being cruel, maybe. Look at this part. His coworker scrolled to the comments section. Thousands of people were talking about Victoria, and not in a good way. She's turned a memorial into her own concert tour. That evening, Daniel found Lily at the kitchen table with papers spread everywhere. She was writing something, her tongue poking out in concentration the way it always did when she was focused. "What are you working on, sweetheart?" She quickly tried to cover the papers, but he'd already seen. They were printouts, dozens of them. "Sheet music. Lily, what is all this?" Her face turned red. "I used my allowance at the library. They let you print stuff if you pay." "It's the Chopin song, Daddy. The one from the challenge." Daniel's heart sank. "Honey, we talked about this." "No, you talked." "I listened." She pushed one of the papers toward him. "Mrs. Whitmore's letter said you were special." She wouldn't lie. "That was a long time ago. So, you're still you." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "Mommy loved when you played. She told me once that your music made her feel like everything would be okay, even when she was really sick." Daniel had to turn away. His wife had said that near the end. When the pain was bad and the medications weren't working anymore, she'd asked him to play. He'd sat at their cheap keyboard and played whatever came to mind, and she'd closed her eyes and smiled. "I can't, Lily. I haven't played in 2 years. My fingers don't even remember how." "Then teach them again." The simple logic of a 7-year-old, as if it were that easy. But that night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel sat at their tiny kitchen table and looked at the sheet music she'd printed. Chopin's Ballade No. 1. The notes swam before his eyes, familiar and foreign at the same time. His fingers moved unconsciously, pressing against the table as if keys were beneath them. He remembered Mrs. Whitmore's studio, the afternoon light coming through tall windows, her patient voice guiding him through each difficult passage. "The music isn't in the notes, Daniel. The notes are just instructions. The music is in what you bring to them." The next day, Daniel did something he hadn't done in years. During his lunch break, instead of eating with his co-workers, he walked to St. Mary's Church 3 blocks away. He'd heard they had an old piano in the basement, used for choir practice. Father Miguel was sorting through hymnals when Daniel knocked on the door. "Can I help you, son? I know this sounds strange, but I heard you have a piano here. I was wondering if maybe when nobody's using it I could practice sometimes." Father Miguel studied him for a long moment. "You play?" "I used to. A long time ago. The piano's in the basement. Nobody uses it after 6 in the evening. The janitor, Mr. Chen, he's here until 9 most nights. I'll let him know you might be coming by." That evening, after putting Lily to bed at his neighbor's apartment, Daniel returned to the church. The basement was quiet and cool. The piano was old and upright that had seen better days, but when Daniel pressed middle C it rang true. His hands shook as he placed them on the keys. How did this go again? The opening of the ballade was supposed to be soft, questioning, almost like a whisper. The first notes came out clumsy and hesitant. His fingers stumbled over passages that used to flow like water. He'd forgotten the fingering for the left hand in the second page. His timing was off, his rhythm unsteady. An hour passed. Then another. Daniel's frustration grew with each mistake. This was impossible. Victoria was right. This piece required constant practice, professional training, years of dedication. "You're pushing too hard." Daniel jumped. An elderly man stood near the stairs, a mop in one hand. "Mr. Chen, the janitor. Sorry, I didn't mean to bother you." "You're not bothering anyone, but you're playing like you're angry at the piano." "Why?" Daniel laughed bitterly. "Because I can't remember how to do this anymore." "Ah." Mr. Chen leaned his mop against the wall and sat on an old folding chair. "May I tell you something? I came to this country 40 years ago. Couldn't speak English. Worked as a dishwasher. Every day I tried to learn new words, and every day I felt stupid because I couldn't remember them. How did you learn? I stopped being angry at myself. Started being patient. Language came back slowly, one word at a time." He gestured at the piano. "Maybe music is the same way. You're not trying to remember. You're trying to relearn. Different thing." Over the next week, Daniel came to the church every night. Lily knew where he went, though he'd asked her not to tell anyone. It was their secret. His fingers began to remember. The calluses started forming again on his fingertips. The passages became smoother, though still far from perfect. Some nights Mr. Chen would sit and listen. He never said much, just nodded occasionally or brought Daniel water. Meanwhile, Victoria's show continued. Another person tried and failed. Then another. She was up to $3,000 in charitable donations, which she mentioned in every interview. "It's clear that my aunt overestimated the talent pool," Victoria said in her latest media appearance. "But that's quite all right. At least some good is coming from these attempts. And when I win, as we all know I will, the piano will go to the Prestige Academy where it belongs." Lily watched this particular interview with her arms crossed. "Daddy," she said when it ended, "are you practicing?" Daniel had been carrying Mrs. Whitmore's letter in his wallet. He pulled it out now, read it again. "I've always believed you were meant for something special." "Yes," he finally answered his daughter. "I'm practicing." "Good." Lily opened her little notebook, the one she'd been keeping hidden. On the first page, she'd written, "Daddy's Journey Back," in careful lettering. Below it were dates and notes. Day 1, Daddy went to church. Day 2, Daddy's fingers hurt, but he went anyway. Day 3, Daddy smiled when he came home. "You've been keeping track? Somebody has to believe in you, Daddy. Mrs. Whitmore did. Mommy did. And I do too." That night, Daniel practiced for 3 hours straight. His fingers ached and his back was sore. But for the first time in 2 years, he felt something he'd almost forgotten. Not quite hope yet, but maybe the memory of what hope used to feel like. Mr. Chen listened from his chair and smiled. "Better," was all he said. "Much better." 3 weeks had passed since the reading of the will. Daniel's hands were changing. The softness from years of construction work was giving way to something else. His fingertips had hardened again, developing the calluses that every serious pianist knows. Sometimes at work, he'd catch himself tapping out rhythms on his lunchbox, his fingers moving through invisible keys. Lily noticed everything. She'd started her own little ritual. Every morning before school, she'd check his hands. "Good," she'd say, running her small fingers over his calluses. "They're getting stronger." The practice sessions at St. Mary's had become sacred to Daniel. Every evening after Lily was in bed, he'd walk the 3 blocks to the church basement. The old upright piano wasn't perfect, but it was becoming his. He'd learned its quirks, which keys stuck slightly, which ones rang a bit flat. Mr. Chen was always there, quietly mopping floors or organizing supplies. Sometimes he'd sit and listen. Other times he'd work nearby, the swish of his mop providing a gentle rhythm. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried weight. One night, Daniel was struggling with a particularly difficult section. The notes required his hands to stretch across the keyboard, moving in opposite directions while maintaining perfect timing. He'd been working on it for an hour, and his frustration was building with each mistake. "You know what I notice?" Mr. Chen said from his chair. Daniel stopped playing. "What?" "When you play the easy parts, you smile a little. When you get to hard parts, your face becomes stone, like you're going to war. This section is nearly impossible. Nearly impossible is not impossible." Mr. Chen stood and walked over to the piano. "May I?" Daniel slid over on the bench. Mr. Chen sat down and placed his hands on the keys. Daniel hadn't known the old man could play. What came out wasn't Chopin. It was something simpler, maybe a folk song from Mr. Chen's childhood. But the way he played it with such gentleness and feeling made it beautiful. "I'm not good player," Mr. Chen said when he finished. "I only know few songs. But my mother taught me something. She said music is like speaking to someone you love. You don't shout the hard words louder. You say them with more care." Daniel looked at the sheet music in front of him. He'd been attacking the difficult sections, trying to force his fingers to obey. But Chopin hadn't written them to be attacked. He'd written them to be felt. He tried again, this time thinking about his wife. How she'd looked at him when he played. How her face would soften. How the pain would leave her eyes for just a few moments. The notes began to flow differently. Not perfect, but alive. "Better," Mr. Chen said simply, returning to his mop. Meanwhile, the outside world had moved on from the piano challenge. Victoria had done 7 interviews in 3 weeks. The failed attempts had stopped coming. People had given up. The whole thing had become a joke online. with memes about Victoria's impossible challenge and her generous charitable donations that somehow always kept her in the spotlight. Daniel saw one meme that made him pause. It showed Victoria standing next to the piano with text that read, "When you create a challenge knowing you're the only one who can win." The comments were brutal. People were calling her entitled, saying she'd turned her aunt's memorial into a vanity project. But Victoria didn't seem bothered. In her latest interview, she announced that she'd be performing the piece herself in 1 week on the final day of the challenge period. "I want to honor my aunt properly," she said, though everyone knew what she really meant. She was ready to claim her prize. The news hit Daniel harder than he expected. 1 week. He'd been practicing for 3 weeks and he still wasn't ready. There were sections he could barely get through without mistakes. The timing was off in places. His left hand still stumbled over certain passages. That night at the church, nothing went right. Every mistake felt magnified. Every wrong note echoed in his head. By the end of 2 hours, he wanted to put his fist through the piano keys. "I can't do this," he said out loud. "What was I thinking?" Victoria's right. This piece needs years of constant practice. "I'm a construction worker who plays in a church basement at night. I'm delusional." Mr. Chen had been unusually quiet that evening. Now he spoke. "You know why you really play this music?" "Because Mrs. Whitmore wanted me to." "No, you play because you need to. Not for piano. Not for challenge. For you." He pointed at Daniel's chest. "Something in here broke when your wife died. Music is how you fix it." Daniel felt his eyes burn. "I don't know if I can fix it. Maybe not all the way, but piece by piece, note by note. That's what you're doing here every night. The challenge, the piano, they don't matter so much. What matters is you're trying." When Daniel got home that night, he found Lily still awake, sitting in bed with her notebook. She'd been crying. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" "I saw on the computer. Victoria's going to play in 1 week. She's going to win." Daniel sat on the edge of her bed. "Probably, yes. But you've been practicing so hard." "I know. It's not fair." Lily's voice cracked. "Mrs. Whitmore wanted you to have the piano. She wrote you that letter. She believed in you." Daniel pulled his daughter close. "Sometimes life isn't fair, honey. Sometimes we try our best and it's not enough. That doesn't mean trying wasn't worth it. Are you going to give up?" The question hung in the air. Daniel thought about the past 3 weeks, the hours in the church basement, the slowly returning muscle memory, the way his fingers were remembering things his mind had forgotten, the feeling when he played well, like his wife was there listening. "No," he said finally, "I'm not going to give up. But I need you to understand something. Even if I go through with this, even if I play, I'm probably not going to win. Victoria is a professional. She's been playing her whole life without stopping. I'm just a guy who used to be good and is trying to find his way back." Lily wiped her eyes. "But you're going to try?" "Yeah, I'm going to try." She hugged him tight. "That's all Mrs. Whitmore wanted. That's what her letter said. She wanted you to believe in yourself again." The next morning, Daniel did something he'd been avoiding. He called the lawyer and registered for the challenge. His attempt would be the day before Victoria's, 5 days away. When word got out that someone else had registered, the media picked it up again. Not big news, just a small mention. "Mystery challenger registers for final attempt before Victoria Whitmore's closing performance." Victoria responded on social media. "I welcome all serious attempts. May the best musician win." But her smile in the video said something else. It said she wasn't worried at all. At work, Daniel's hands were shaking. His coworker noticed. "You okay, man?" "I registered for that piano challenge." "What? The Chopin thing? Are you crazy?" "Probably." His coworker laughed, then saw Daniel's face. "Wait, you're serious? You can actually play that?" "I used to be able to. We'll see if I still can." That evening, Daniel arrived at the church to find something unexpected. Mr. Chen wasn't alone. Father Miguel was there too, and 3 other people Daniel had never met. "What's going on?" Father Miguel smiled. "Mr. Chen told us what you've been doing. These folks heard and wanted to listen. We thought maybe you could use a small audience. Get used to playing for people again." Daniel's first instinct was to refuse, but then he remembered what performing used to feel like. The energy of having listeners, the way it changed the music. He sat at the piano. His hands were trembling. The small audience waited quietly. 5 strangers who had nothing to gain from being there, who'd simply come because they'd heard someone was trying to do something difficult. Daniel placed his fingers on the keys. He thought about Mrs. Whitmore and her belief in him. He thought about his wife and how music had comforted her. He thought about Lily and her notebook, documenting his journey back to himself. The opening notes filled the basement, soft and questioning, just like they were supposed to be. And this time, with people listening, the music felt different. It felt real. When he finished, 45 minutes later, having played through the entire piece for the first time without stopping, the small audience applauded. It wasn't perfect. There had been mistakes, but he'd made it through. Mr. Chen was smiling. "Now you're ready," he said. Daniel wasn't sure if that was true, but for the first time he believed he had a chance. The morning of Daniel's performance arrived cold and gray. He barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the sheet music, heard the notes in his head. His fingers moved against the pillow, practicing passages in his sleep. Lily woke him at 6, already dressed in her best outfit. A blue dress with white flowers that her mother had bought her 2 years ago. It was getting small on her now, but she'd insisted on wearing it. "Why that dress, sweetheart?" "Mommy bought it for me. I want her to be there today, kind of." She held up something else, a scarf soft and purple. Her mother's favorite. "Can I wear this too?" Daniel's throat tightened. "Of course you can." They ate breakfast in silence. Daniel couldn't taste anything. His stomach was twisted in knots. He kept looking at his hands, flexing his fingers, making sure they still remembered what to do. The performance was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon at Mrs. Whitmore's estate. Daniel had taken the day off work. His boss had been surprisingly supportive. "Go show them what you've got," he'd said. When they arrived at the estate, Daniel's heart sank. He'd expected it to be quiet, like the reading of the will had been. Instead, there were news vans parked outside. Cameras, reporters, what's all this? He asked the lawyer who met them at the door. The lawyer looked uncomfortable. Word got out that someone was making a final attempt before Victoria's performance tomorrow. The media found it interesting, I suppose. The underdog story. Victoria was there too, standing near the grand hall entrance, talking to a reporter. She looked perfect as always, wearing an expensive cream-colored suit. When she saw Daniel, her expression flickered with something. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. She excused herself from the reporter and walked over. Up close, Daniel could see she was older than he'd thought. There were fine lines around her eyes, a hardness in her expression that seemed permanent. "You're the mystery challenger?" She looked him up and down, taking in his second-hand suit that Lily had helped him pick out at the thrift store. "I remember you. From the will reading. You knew my aunt?"
She was my teacher.
"A long time ago." Victoria's laugh was sharp. "My aunt taught many people. That doesn't mean they can play Chopin's ballad." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Look, I don't know what you're trying to prove, but you're going to embarrass yourself. This piece is brutal. Even professionals struggle with it. Save yourself the humiliation and withdraw now. No, thank you. Suit yourself." She walked away, but Daniel saw her say something to one of the cameramen. They both looked at him and laughed. Lily grabbed his hand. "She's afraid, Daddy." "What makes you say that?" "Because she's being extra mean. That's what kids do when they're scared they might lose." The grand hall was more crowded than Daniel had imagined. The 3 judges sat at a long table in front. 2 men and 1 woman, all with serious expressions. Behind them sat about 30 people. Some were relatives from the will reading, others were reporters. A few he didn't recognize at all. His neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, was there, which surprised him. So was his boss. And in the back corner, Daniel spotted Mr. Chen in his church janitor uniform, sitting quietly with Father Miguel. The lawyer explained the rules. Daniel would play the entire piece. The judges would listen without interruption. Afterward, they would deliberate and announce their decision. "Mr. Carter, whenever you're ready." Daniel walked to the piano. Mrs. Whitmore's beautiful 1920s Steinway. He'd played it once before, 15 years ago, when he was still her student. It had felt like touching something holy then. It felt the same way now. He sat on the bench and adjusted it slightly. Looked out at the audience. Lily was in the front row, clutching her mother's scarf, her eyes huge and trusting. Behind her, he could see cameras recording. Victoria stood off to the side, arms crossed, that same cold smile on her face. Daniel's hands were shaking. He placed them on his lap, took a deep breath. Remembered what Mr. Chen had said. Music is like speaking to someone you love. Who was he speaking to? Mrs. Whitmore, who had believed in him when he was just a teenager with dreams. His wife, who had found peace in his playing even in her darkest moments. Lily, who needed to see her father try even if he failed. Himself, maybe. The part of him that had died 2 years ago and was trying to find its way back. He lifted his hands and placed them on the keys. The opening came out soft, almost a whisper. A question posed in notes. The first page was gentle, deceptive in its simplicity. Daniel felt his nervousness begin to fade. His fingers remembered. They knew this path. As the piece progressed, he forgot about the cameras. Forgot about Victoria's smirk. Forgot about the judges with their serious faces. There was only the music and the story it told. The ballade moved through its emotional landscape. Gentle sections that spoke of beauty and innocence. Then the darkness came. The minor keys that suggested loss and struggle. Daniel thought of hospital rooms and medical bills. Of working double shifts and coming home exhausted to a daughter who needed him. Then the music shifted again. Not back to innocence, but forward into something more complex. Acceptance, maybe. Or the kind of strength that comes from surviving pain. His hands moved across the keys, the left hand providing foundation while the right hand sang out the melody. He reached the section that had given him so much trouble in practice. The part where both hands had to stretch and move in opposite directions. His fingers found their positions. The notes came out clear. He was doing it. The piece built toward its dramatic climax. This was the part that required everything. Technical skill and emotional depth combined. Daniel's hands flew across the keyboard. Loud, powerful, almost violent in its intensity. This was the storm. The breaking point. The moment where everything hangs in the balance. He thought about his wife's final days. About holding Lily as she cried. About selling the piano to pay bills. About the years of just surviving. Just getting through each day. All of it poured into the music. Then, as Chopin had written it, the storm passed. The final section came soft again, but different from the opening. Not a question anymore. More like a statement. Or maybe a goodbye. The notes were simple, almost sparse. But they carried weight. Daniel played the final chord and lifted his hands from the keys. The silence that followed felt endless. He sat frozen on the bench, his heart pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. Had he made mistakes? Probably. Had it been perfect? Definitely not, but he'd made it through. He'd played the entire piece, then someone started clapping. Not polite, slow applause. Real clapping. Daniel turned to see Mr. Chen standing, his old hands coming together firmly. Father Miguel joined him. Then Mrs. Rodriguez, then his boss. One by one, people stood. Even some of the reporters. The sound filled the grand hall. Lily was crying, still sitting in the front row, clutching her mother's scarf. Happy tears this time. Daniel looked at the judges. The woman in the middle was wiping her eyes. The man to her left was leaning back in his chair, his expression unreadable. The third judge was writing something furiously in his notebook. Then Daniel looked at Victoria. She wasn't clapping. She stood completely still, her face pale, her arms no longer crossed. She looked like someone had just told her something impossible. Her mouth opened slightly, closed, opened again. No words came out. The head judge, the woman, stood up. The applause died down. Everyone sat except Daniel, who remained at the piano, unsure what to do. "Mr. Carter," she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "In 30 years of judging piano performances, I have heard Chopin's Ballade No. 1 played hundreds of times. By students, by professionals, by masters of their craft." She paused, and Daniel felt his stomach drop. Here it came. The gentle rejection. The nice try, but not quite good enough. "What you just played," she continued, "was not technically perfect. You had some timing issues in the fourth section. Your left hand was slightly behind in measure 83. A few notes in the climax were not as crisp as they could have been." Victoria's posture relaxed. She almost smiled. "However," the judge said, and her voice grew stronger, "technical perfection is not the only measure of music. It is not even the most important measure. What you played had something that cannot be taught in any conservatory or music school. It had truth. It had soul. It had the kind of emotional honesty that Chopin himself was reaching for when he wrote this piece." She looked at the other two judges. They both nodded. The question before us was not who can play this piece without mistakes. The question was, who can play this piece in a way that honors Mrs. Whitmore's legacy? And I believe unanimously we have found that person. Daniel's legs almost gave out. Did she just say what he thought she said? Mr. Carter, the piano is yours. For a moment, Daniel couldn't move. The words hung in the air. The piano is yours. He looked down at his hands, still trembling slightly, then at the beautiful Steinway that had been Mrs. Whitmore's pride and joy. Lily broke the silence. She ran to him, throwing her arms around his waist, her mother's purple scarf trailing behind her. You did it, Daddy. You did it. The room erupted in applause again, louder this time. People Daniel didn't even know were congratulating him. Reporters surged forward with cameras and microphones. The lawyer was trying to explain something about paperwork. Everything became a blur of noise and movement. Through it all, Daniel saw Victoria. She hadn't moved from her spot. Her face had gone from pale to flushed, her carefully maintained composure cracking. She looked at the piano, then at Daniel, then at the judges as if they'd betrayed her. Finally, she walked over. Up close, Daniel could see her hands were shaking. I don't understand, she said quietly so only he could hear. I've been playing since I was 4 years old. I've performed in concert halls across Europe. I've won competitions. That piano was supposed to be mine. Daniel didn't know what to say. Part of him felt bad for her. But another part remembered her cruel comments, her dismissive laughter, the way she'd turned the whole challenge into a spectacle about her own greatness. Your aunt didn't leave it to the best technical player, Daniel said. She left it to whoever could honor her legacy. Maybe that means something different than what you thought. Victoria's eyes filled with angry tears. She was my aunt. I knew her my whole life, and she was my teacher for 2 years. Sometimes the people who change us aren't the ones we know the longest. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Some of the reporters tried to follow her, but she pushed past them and left the estate. Daniel watched her go and felt an unexpected sadness. She'd lost more than a piano today. She'd lost her assumption that talent and status meant everything. The lawyer finally managed to pull Daniel aside. We'll need to arrange delivery of the piano to your residence. Where would you like it placed? Daniel looked at the Steinway, then at Lily. Their apartment was small, 1 bedroom that they shared. There was barely room for their second-hand furniture, let alone a concert grand piano. Actually, Daniel said slowly, an idea forming. I need to think about this. Can I let you know in a few days? The lawyer looked puzzled but agreed. That evening, after the chaos had settled and the reporters had left, Daniel sat with Lily at their small kitchen table. Between them was Mrs. Whitmore's letter, worn now from being read so many times. We could sell it, Lily said quietly. The piano. It's worth a lot of money. We could get a bigger apartment. You wouldn't have to work such long hours. Is that what you want? She was quiet for a long moment. I want you to be happy, Daddy. The piano makes you happy. But I also know you work really hard and you're always tired. Daniel looked at his daughter, so young but trying to be so grown up. You know what I learned these past few weeks? What? That playing music again did make me happy. But not because of the piano itself. It was about remembering who I used to be, finding that part of me again. And I realized something else too. What? Mrs. Whitmore didn't just teach me music. She taught me to see what matters. She could have left that piano to Victoria directly. She had the power to do that. But she created this challenge instead. Why do you think that is? Lily thought about it. Because she wanted someone to earn it? Maybe. Or maybe she wanted to see what people would do with a second chance. What they'd learn about themselves by trying. Over the next few days, Daniel made some calls. He visited some places. He talked to people he hadn't spoken to in years. And slowly, a plan came together. 1 week later, Daniel stood in front of the Riverside Community Center. It was in the neighborhood where he'd grown up, where he'd first discovered piano at an after-school program that couldn't afford to stay open. The building was worn but still standing, serving families who couldn't afford expensive music lessons or instruments. The director, Ms. Chen, no relation to Mr. Chen from the church, met him at the door. She was younger than he expected, energetic and passionate about bringing arts education to kids who otherwise wouldn't have access. You really want to donate the piano here? She asked, disbelief in her voice. Do you know what it's worth? I do. That's exactly why it should be here. They walked inside to the main room. About 30 kids were there. ranging from 6 years old to teenagers. When they saw the Steinway being carefully wheeled in by professional movers, their eyes went wide. "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," one little girl whispered. Daniel knelt down to her level. "Do you want to learn to play?" She nodded vigorously. "Then you'll get your chance. This piano is going to stay right here, where anyone who wants to learn can use it." Ms. Chen wiped her eyes. "I don't know what to say. This is going to change everything for these kids." "There's one more thing," Daniel said. "I'd like to teach here, part-time, whenever I can. I'm not a professional and I'm still remembering things myself. But I know what it's like to have someone believe in you when you're just starting out. I'd like to pass that on." That's when Daniel noticed Mr. Chen standing in the doorway, still in his janitor uniform from the church. "He must have come straight from work. You invited him?" Daniel asked Ms. Chen. "No, I did," said a voice behind them. Father Miguel stepped in, smiling. "I thought he should see what his wisdom helped create." Mr. Chen walked over to the piano, ran his hand gently across its polished surface. "Your teacher would be proud," he said to Daniel. "Not because you won, because you understood." The community center held a small ceremony. They mounted a plaque on the wall next to the piano. It read, "The Helena Whitmore Piano. In memory of a teacher who believed that music belongs to everyone. May all who play find their voice." The ceremony made the local news. Not the big dramatic story that Victoria had been chasing, but something quieter and more meaningful. The reporter interviewed some of the kids who would be learning on the Steinway. "What will you play?" the reporter asked one boy. "Everything," the boy said with absolute certainty. "I'm going to learn everything." A few days after the ceremony, Daniel received an unexpected visitor at work. Victoria stood outside the construction site, looking uncomfortable in her expensive clothes among the dust and machinery. "Can we talk?" she asked. They walked to a quiet spot away from the noise. Victoria looked different somehow. Smaller, maybe. More uncertain. "I saw the news," she said, "about what you did with the piano. It felt right. I've been thinking a lot this past week. About my aunt, about why she created that challenge." Victoria took a deep breath. "I was so sure it was about finding the best pianist. But it wasn't, was it? I think it was about finding someone who understood what music really means. Not as a performance or a competition, but as something that connects people, that heals them, that gives them hope." Victoria nodded slowly. "I spent my whole life trying to be perfect, trying to prove I was the best. I thought that's what would make my aunt proud. But maybe she wanted me to learn something else entirely." "It's not too late," Daniel said gently. "I'd like to help. At the community center. I could teach too, the advanced students maybe. If you think they'd want me after everything." Daniel smiled. "Everyone deserves a second chance. That's kind of the whole point." 6 months later, the community center's music program was thriving. Daniel taught beginners 3 evenings a week. Victoria, true to her word, came in twice a week to work with advanced students. She was different now, patient where she'd been dismissive, encouraging where she'd been critical. Lily had started lessons on the Steinway, learning from her father the same way he'd once learned from Mrs. Whitmore. She was talented, picking up the basics quickly. But more than that, she loved it. She'd sit at that piano for hours, working through simple pieces with the same determination her father had shown. One evening, after the last student had left, Daniel sat at the piano alone. His fingers found the opening notes of Chopin's ballade. He played it differently now, not as a challenge to overcome, but as an old friend to revisit. The mistakes didn't bother him anymore. They were part of the journey. Mr. Chen appeared in the doorway, mopping the community center floors just like he mopped the church. "Still sounds better every time," he said. "You ever think about how strange life is?" Daniel asked. "How one person's kindness can change everything. Not strange, natural, like planting seed. Mrs. Whitmore planted seeds in you long time ago. Now you plant seeds in these kids. That's how good things grow." Daniel looked around the room at the photos on the wall. Kids at their first recital, teenagers who'd won scholarships to music schools, adults who'd discovered a love of music later in life. All of them touched by one piano and the teacher who'd known exactly what to do with it. Mrs. Whitmore's legacy wasn't the Steinway itself. It was every person who sat at those keys and found something within themselves they didn't know was there. It was every child who learned that beauty and art weren't just for the wealthy or the perfectly trained. It was the connection between a teacher and a student, passed forward through generations. That night, Daniel went home to find Lily practicing on their second-hand keyboard, the one they'd bought after he'd won the piano. She was working on a simple piece, tongue poking out in concentration. "How was your day, Daddy?" "Perfect," he said, and meant it. Absolutely perfect.